Good morning. This is Stuart Battle with the LaRouche Organization. It is December 27th, 2022. Welcome back from the Christmas weekend last weekend. I am filling in for Harley again today. He's out traveling a little this week. So I would like to keep you updated and give you the update for the world that we live in today. And I'll just say to start that I think it is becoming increasingly clear the situation that confronts us. And despite the fact that this inherently means it gets more dangerous, especially as people in the West push for an all out confrontation over the situation in Ukraine, nonetheless, it is encroaching on a situation where we can assert reality. Reality is on our side. So I'm going to start with today the most recent release of the Twitter files, which has, of course, been coming out over the recent weeks about major government involvement in censorship, aggressive censorship through Twitter and other social media platforms, but particularly Twitter, and the use of it to prevent a certain narrative or anything other than the acceptable narrative from getting out. What's interesting with the most recent Twitter revelations is that it actually breaks the heretofore somewhat partisan divide of namely Republicans and Democrats, or the Twitter being used to censor Republicans simply. But what you'll see is that this most recent release indicates a much broader attempt to control it. So what Matt Taibbi says in this most recent release is that the FBI has been acting as a doorman to a vast program of social media surveillance and censorship, encompassing agencies across the federal government, from the State Department to Pentagon to the CIA. So he ends up talking about these, what's called OGA, meaning other government organizations, which became basically intertwined in daily, maybe not daily, but certainly weekly, certainly very frequent meetings with the Twitter executives to point out accounts that were violating their terms. They even interestingly made they flagged accounts using Twitter's rules, Twitter's rules of what violates it, in order to very quickly already have the work done. So Twitter just had to sign off on it. One of the lawyers of Twitter, Jim Baker, who was actually a former FBI guy, made the point that this is odd that the FBI would be using their own rules to tell them what to do. Now, in one case that I think is particularly interesting is the highlighting of an account called Info BRICS. BRICS being the establishment of the Brazil, Russia, India, China grouping of nations, which we have highlighted, the LaRouche movement has highlighted for a number of years as an assertion of genuine intent to develop economically outside of the Western financial dictatorships and different money markets which prevented development. So what one OGA member writes to Twitter, and of course you find out later this means a member of the CIA, wrote that while we have no specific evidence that this account is tied to anything Russian, BRICS is an inherently Russia-dominated economic organization. So it was always likely that a website and Twitter account designed to promote it would be directed by the Kremlin. And then he says, therefore, I'm going to go ahead and with the suspension and mark the account as unsafe, despite no evidence. So, again, just it's an important point that the censorship was never to simply stop the Republicans or Hunter Biden's laptop from getting out, but the effort from what people call the deep state was much broader, and they were much more worried not just about Donald Trump getting in the White House, but they were worried about the United States moving in the direction of an alternative to the unipolar British imperial order, which has been dominant in recent decades. Now, what I'd like to move on to now is what has very clearly been a substantial shift in the Russian leadership and in the stance of the Russian leadership. What previously had been holding out for the best in relations with the West has clearly changed, and that substantially. Over the weekend on Sunday, on Christmas Day, President Putin gave an interview where he said that the policy of our geopolitical opponents is now to tear Russia apart, divide and conquer, he called it. That's what they've always tried to do, and they're trying to do it now. He went on to say that Russia continues to be open to discuss acceptable solutions regarding the end of the conflict in Ukraine. However, it's not us who's rejecting them, but them. So this was then echoed same day by former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is the current deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council. He wrote an article in the Rossiyskaya Gazeta, where he made the point that there's no one left in the West whom Russia can talk with. It's falling on deaf ears. So he said that this last year was a turning point, which demonstrated that there is no room for trust or for hope in our partners' honesty. Regrettably, there is no one in the West we can negotiate anything with. Normal relations with the West can be forgotten for years or even decades to come. He went on to say that we will develop relations with the rest of the world, which is very big, and has normal relations with us. So that gives you an indication of some of what they are increasingly saying very explicitly, which is that they want a West, a United States that can negotiate, that can be honest. Unfortunately, that is not happening. Now, lastly, I want to read you remarks from the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who spoke to reporters yesterday. Now, what Lavrov said, which is interesting, is he attacked the United States as wanting the so-called end of history. Now, this refers to a famous book by Francis Fukuyama, written in 1992, called The End of History and the Last Man, which basically argues that with the fall of the Soviet Union, the Western liberal world has won the fight against godless communism or authoritarianism, or barbarism, as some say, and therefore liberal democracy is now a bulldozer that will inevitably sweep up every nation in the world, and that will be the end of history. So Lavrov doesn't agree, and he says it very, very strongly. He says that this is he says that this is an attempt by the United States to assert an end of history, to establish complete dominance, but the course of history cannot be stopped. There is no and never will be an end to history. Humanity has gone through attempts to subjugate it more than once by another force that intends to dictate everything on everyone. And then he said further, we're not going to run after the West. They broke off almost all relations. We will focus on those who have never let us down and with whom we have achieved very difficult compromises without any deception. With the West, everything is exactly the opposite. Now, what is he saying? Certainly everyone has been bombarded with the idea that democracy is good and authoritarianism is bad. But this is very different from the United States' constitution and the notion of a constitutional republic, or the notion of a republic in general. Francis Fukuyama was a member of the Project for a New American Century. which was the beginning of the neoconservative grouping, which asserted that now that the Soviet Union is gone, we can finally establish a world where um, no other powers can challenge our hegemony. So they wanted absolute dominance over the world, and this is what liberal democracy means today. That's what the rules-based order means today, and it's a complete sham. It has nothing to do with the true United States, and you can see this through the hypocrisy, the absolute hypocrisy of waging wars for human rights in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Syria. Um, you can see it similarly in the massive push for drug legalization in Western countries in the name of so-called democratic freedoms, mind-killing drugs. This is not the pursuit of happiness and the right to life and liberty of the real United States. This is not the American system of Alexander Hamilton or of Lyndon LaRouche, who, of course, spoke of the American system often. Rather, the true United States was a rejection of the oligarchical system, which is an outlook that treats human beings as simply advanced animals to be managed, to be controlled, and herded and culled when the time comes. So this is what, this is really the question of reviving the real United States and of the rest of the world, profoundly wishing that we will do so. It is not an attack on the United States and our constitutional republic. It's far from it. And I will just say that the best way that could be done today, the way that the United States could be again a role model for the world, the so-called beacon of hope for the world, would be this question of true economic development. The principle of the advancement for future generations in the use of the modern industrial capabilities that exist that could easily allow this world to have far more than 10 billion people and solve poverty and hunger forever and solve war, stop conflict forever with true economic development. This is what the United States could and should give to the world, and actually have partnerships with countries like Russia, China, India, have a new discussion of a new economic architecture that would allow and encourage the development of the world rather than suppress it and limit the advancement of others. So again, I think I'll just end by emphasizing that the task is becoming more clear. And like I said, reality is on our side. It's asserting itself more clearly. And even though it is a frightening world and the danger is extremely severe, it is becoming more clear. And that's something we should use in our organizing, and we should recruit as much as possible. And I encourage you to do so and share this video, and tune in again soon. So again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.